Welcome to another exciting episode of The Business of Sound. I'm David Segura, the co-founder and CEO of Glassbox Media and the host for today's show. As always, our goal for this podcast is to provide you with great insights and even news and trends that we think will make you a better marketer, a better podcaster, and a better media professional. As always, we do ask kindly that you consider giving us a 5-star review to make the podcast a little bit more discoverable. We certainly appreciate it quite a bit. And if you also want to, you can certainly follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram or your favorite social media account. Today's episode is going to be a little bit special, and it's going to be actually driven and led by our head of marketing, Nick Kastner.
Hello everyone, David. Thank you for having me on the show. And as the marketing guy, I really appreciate the strong call to actions at the start of every episode. So nice work there.
Well, I learned it for you. So.
Yeah, thank you. On today's episode, the person I'm chatting with is Stephanie Arakelian. Stephanie and I connected over a year ago at a podcast movement, but this was my first podcast movement. You know, I kind of came in a little nervous, didn't exactly know what to expect. And Stephanie was so gracious with her time. She was literally my first meeting at the conference, and we sat for over an hour. She just walked me through every facet of podcast marketing and basically just brought me on as here's everything you need to know at the scale you're working with. She has since changed jobs and is working, running the marketing at Impact Theory, which is a leading self-help and self-improvement show. They've had guests such as Andrew Huberman, Matthew McConaughey. So really, she's working with the best of the best, and I cannot wait to speak with her. Our guest for today's episode is Stephanie Arakelian. She is the marketing manager at Impact Theory. Impact Theory is one of the largest self-help and improvement podcasts. They have had recent guests like Matthew McConaughey, Simon Sinek. They're sort of the biggest names in this space. Impact Theory is one of the largest shows in this space. So Stephanie, I cannot wait for this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Nick. I'm so excited to talk with you and connect and share everything that's going on right now, because there's a lot.
So much. And I literally have like a long list of things I'm going to try to hit in this in this conversation. But I think a good starting point for the listeners who are meeting you for the very first time. How did you find yourself in podcasting, and what's your journey been like to get to Impact Theory?
That's such a good question. And I think of anyone in the industry right now, because I don't think anyone who has been in the industry for at least a couple of years, when they were younger, thought like, I'm going to go into podcasting. So it's really cool that we all ended up here and have all had very interesting and varied paths to get here. And yet we all ended up here, and it's a community of really amazing people. But the story of me getting here, I will try to keep it as short as possible. So I went to acting school at NYU, and I was trained, classically trained actor, and was like, I'm, going to stay in New York and do Broadway. And I did it for a couple of years and loved it, and then really hated the cold and the summers and most of the year in New York. So I moved to LA. And it was a really interesting time in acting. It was like the rise of the influencer on social media. Instagram was just becoming a thing, and you could use the right hashtags and get, thousands of more likes because it was much more searchable, and it was easier to be discovered on there. And so I really fell in love with the social media side of things. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. It incorporates in, as an actor, I have to, dive into this marketing side and promote myself. So I started studying into it and ended up lying my way into a job where I became the head of marketing for a manufacturing company that I was absolutely not qualified for. But I loved it and learned a lot. And I would have to Google things on the fly. They would come in and say, oh, we need to redesign this product. Can you go into Illustrator and make these adjustments? And I have never opened Illustrator in my life. And I'd be like, yeah, no problem. Give me 5 minutes. And like YouTube, like, how do I open Illustrator and use this program? So lots of late night, YouTube sessions, learning things. And
of course,
I really, it was a great experience to learn all the sides of marketing within a company, but I fell in love with the social media side. So I ended up leaving that company and starting my own social media and digital marketing agency. which I loved. I worked with clients of all industries, from bike racks for your car to organic dog poop bags to motivational speakers across the world, and everything in between, apparel. And I was introduced to a client that said, "Oh, we're starting a podcast network. We just need a little bit of social media help and maybe some, digital marketing." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Let me come in and meet you." And fell in love with the company. That was Kurtco, and I met Bill Curtis and was really excited. This was something new, something different. I hadn't really worked in podcasting. I didn't really listen to podcasts at that time. And when I came in, I was the second or third hire to the company because they were just building up the podcast side. And I helped them build their network from the ground up, making decisions on what hosting platform we're using. How do you build an RSS feed? How do you get it out there? How do you distribute it? We all learned together. It was such an incredible experience. And I fell in love with the industry and the community and what people are creating. And I ended up leaving my company to go full-time in-house at Kurtco as their head of marketing, and haven't looked back. I've been in podcasting for 5 years, and it's been the most rewarding experience of my life.
Yes, and you left Kurtco and joined Impact Theory, what, about 6 months ago?
Exactly. Yeah, at the beginning of this year.
All right, amazing. Well, for our audience who may not know, Kurtco really, I think of it as primarily a fiction network, and their largest show is called Solar. It was really kind of the first of its kind in the fiction space, and I'm very interested in the transition from going for a network where you're creating these breakthrough series that are of the first of its kind, and then transitioning to a role where you're with Impact Theory. They have an established audience that's already developed on the podcast, on YouTube, on all these social fronts. How has that transition been now that you're firmly in the Impact Theory world?
I love that you asked that, because I was actually thinking about this on my drive home from the office yesterday, because I'm still subscribed to notifications on Reddit's audio drama subreddit. And so I get the notifications, but I don't work in audio drama anymore. But I was so entrenched in that world because fiction podcasts are still only 1% of all podcasts. Of the 4.4 million that are out there, 1% are fiction. And these are really great storytellers, from the bigger networks to the smaller indie creators. These are people who really have a desire to get their story told. And it's a new way to do it, but it's also an old way. So it's how do you take, the old days of radio dramas, and they're banging pots and pans to do the thunder to what we can do now. For example, Solar, it was designed in 360-degree audio and mastered in Dolby Atmos and Dear VR. So every movement was tracked, every breath. We built out the set, or drew it out. We didn't build it, but we, drew out the set, so we knew where the characters were within the space. So if they're looking this way, how does that sound? And we had an amazing audio engineer, CJ, and he really took the human aspect of it, because when we're talking like this, like our heads move a little bit, right? Like I'm over here, and that's human nature. So your voice needs to follow with that, because you're not just going to be sitting here delivering like, "Hi, Nick, how are you today?" Right?
Yeah.
So it's so cool what we can do. And so we're really pushing the boundaries in audio fiction. And I loved that side of it. So switching over to a completely different style of podcast. These are always on. These are interview style. It is a totally different audience demographic. So switching your brain into a totally different style of the same thing that you're doing is a really interesting situation, but I love it. I love the challenge. And they already have, Tom and Lisa on their podcast, built-in loyal audiences, like you said, not only on podcasts, but also on YouTube. So how do you dive into an already dedicated audience, reinvigorate them, but also bring new audiences in? So it makes your brain stretch in different ways, but it also feels so good.
Yes, and you mentioned YouTube. The Impact Theory YouTube has millions of subscribers, right? Yes.
Yes.
And there's so much dialogue in the podcasting industry on repurposing your content for YouTube, and YouTube has launched a podcast tab in their both YouTube Music product and the general YouTube feed. How have you all approached the nuances between YouTube and like the traditional RSS audio?
It's such a topical question right now. Everyone's talking about it. I mean, Pod News this morning had the update about one of the representatives from YouTube is going to be at Podcast Movement and talking about the updates that we've all been waiting for years. And I'm really grateful for the approach that Tom and Lisa take on their podcast, because they do each have their own very successful YouTubes, and then they have their own podcasts. And what I've really tried to do in the last 6 months is separate them. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, especially podcasters. Building an audience on any platform right now is difficult, right? Unless it's a brand new platform and you get in early, like everyone was trying to get in on Threads. So coming into YouTube right now, and you are a podcaster, I think that it presents a lot of challenges, and you have to look at it differently. I mean, definitely tap into it, like figure out your strategy, because YouTube is the #1 podcast listening platform. So the audience is there.
Yeah.
But when you have these behemoths like Rogan or, Jay Shetty or, other big names in podcasting who have professional studios and setups, and this is what people are watching on YouTube, and you come in as an independent podcaster and you don't maybe not even have a video camera, you just have the audio file with images or an audiogram or something, I think you're going to have a hard time if you're setting yourself up against them. But I think if you are just doing it to reach a different audience and know that these are not the same audiences, like we even look at ours, I just pulled a whole demographic deck this month to show the difference in our YouTube audience versus our podcast audience. Same content, but totally different demographics. And the episodes that do really well on YouTube are not the same episodes that do really well on podcasts. For example, I pulled the top 10 YouTube episodes that Tom has released this year, and I pulled the top 10 podcast episodes that Tom has released this year, and there was one crossover.
Wow. What was the crossover out of curiosity?
That's a very good question that I don't remember off the top of my head.
No means to grill you on details of a report you pulled a month ago. Yeah, exactly. Classic. Do you remember any of the trends, or do you have a feeling on why some content did better on YouTube as opposed to Spotify or Apple?
And this is something that we've been diving into as well. Like, why is there this shift? And I think it's just on who's basically on those platforms, right? Like, who is the demographic who's mostly on YouTube to begin with versus who's mostly on podcasts. Podcast listeners are mostly women. I mean, not overwhelmingly so, but they have the higher majority, and YouTube is the higher majority of men. So already your audience is going to be skewed. And Tom is really great that he's constantly looking at his content and how to evolve it. So he's trying to, instead of just saying like, this is my lane and this is what I do. Okay, we've done this, we've established this. So now we're moving into the next phase of it. How do we build on that? So his content is constantly evolving. And I think that evolving content does better on YouTube than it does on podcasts, because you're going to podcasts for the consistency. You're not going, for breaking news. You're going to wait, 24 to 48 hours to get the full story on it. And that's something that we discuss here at Impact Theory too. So the interesting thing that we've discovered about podcasts and YouTube is, for example, breaking news. So there was an event that happened. It was a Friday night. It was a big economic event. It was the Silicon Valley Bank crashing, right? So it's Friday afternoon. I get a call from Tom and Lisa, like, this just happened. Silicon Valley Bank crashed. We need to put something out. We're going to put it out on YouTube in about an hour. Should we also put it out on podcasts? And I sat for a minute, and this was also, we had just flown back from Podcast Movement Evolutions, and I'm literally walking off the plane down the stairs at Burbank, getting this call in the airport, trying to figure this out. The news is going crazy. And I said, yes, absolutely. YouTube, push it out, because they use Google's algorithm, Google search techniques. So when people are like, oh crap, Silicon Valley Bank crashed, they're going to Google it, and YouTube's going to come up in that search result. Podcasts are different. I told them to hold off the announcement on podcasts until the following Monday. I said, because people don't go to podcasts for breaking news. We want a little bit more in-depth research. We want to know that, yes, this happened, but give me a little bit more facts. Tell me a story with it. We want more than just, like the local news headline of it. As a podcaster, we want the Daily to do a 40-minute episode on it, right? Like, I will wait that 24 hours to get that information on it. So that's kind of how it differs. And it ended up working out great. The podcast or the YouTube episode did phenomenally, even though we dropped it, like Friday night at 6 p.m. Podcast episode that we held until Monday was the best performing episode of the month.
Wow. Remarkable. So interesting. Earlier you mentioned just the difficulty in capturing new audiences, and audience development in media is not as easy as anyone would like. So especially for our listeners who are there, a lot of media buyers, some podcasters, and some investors even. If you were able to give like a quick summary of podcast marketing, what is like the high level 10,000 foot view to provide?
Nothing is off the table. The bigger you can think, the better, because there's no strategy for podcast marketing. It depends on your audience, it depends on your show, It depends on what community you have already built into your ecosystem. And I think the more creative that we can get with it, the better off it's going to be. Podcasting is such a boundaryless industry, and we have so many creative minds and so many amazing things going on that it just can't be contained. So thinking outside the box, and I think we're going to see some really cool, podcast marketing advertisements in the next year as the recession continues, as budgets get tighter. We're going to have to get more creative on how do we reach audiences, while being very careful of our spending. How do we continue to grow our shows and the industry when things are getting tight? And so that's usually when the most creative stuff comes out. Like earlier this year, I lost my mind and I thought the industry was going to go crazy when I was watching the Oscars, and there was a commercial, a dedicated commercial to a podcast. And it wasn't just like, oh, we have this show, and then like there's a rewatch podcast or a follow-up podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The entire commercial was about a podcast. And I was jumping up and down. I was like, this is so cool. Like, this is the first commercial. It's on the Oscars. This is amazing. I tweeted it out and nobody really paid attention. And I think because no one's aware of that yet. They're not used to seeing it. We're starting to see billboards. Pod News does a great job of, podcast ads in the wild.
Yes.
And I think that's what we're going to have to do, is just get really creative in the next year or so as the industry is finding its balance. And as we're like, okay, what is the next audience that we're targeting? We look at like Gen Z. Gen Z is a huge podcast audience. So do we create content for them? Do we cater to them? But then, the boomers are also an untapped audience as well. Do we teach them how to listen? So it's really going after in the new marketplaces that are opening up. The UK is a growing area for podcast listeners. South America, same thing. So we're going to see all of these changes. And I think that will affect marketing and our content a little bit.
Absolutely. A quick note on South America. Erica, our producer, she is the host of the third largest true crime podcast in Brazil. So she knows all about the South American podcasting. Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congrats,
yes.
Erica. That's huge.
Yeah. She's in the green room right now, but shout out Erica.
Shout out Erica.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Yes. So I have two specific things to follow up with. First, you mentioned big thinking, and both at Solar, the Kurtco podcast you formerly worked on, and Impact Theory, you were able to secure a placement to promote the podcast in Times Square. So, talk about big thinking. You're quickly becoming the queen of Times Square, based in Los Angeles. How did those placements come about?
There's a really amazing partnership team at Amazon Music. Got a shout out to Anna Quiroz and Sage Jones. They are a fantastic team to work with. And I've had the pleasure of working with Anna now on 2 out-of-home campaigns. And Sage, this is our first campaign with Impact Theory. And just gone lovely with them. And really what it is the thing that I try to emphasize, and these billboards are the proof of it, is community and collaboration. And what do you have? What can you offer? And how can you support? It's not just about feature me and I have this new shiny thing and here's what I want. It's going in, and this is with anything in podcasting or any relationships really in business, but especially in podcasting because we're all helping each other grow, but going in and saying, what are your goals and how can I help you get there? And then they can turn around and say, what are your goals and how can I help you get there? And figuring it out, maybe you don't have the biggest social following. Maybe you don't have the downloads yet, but what else do you have? Do you have an email of 100,000 people maybe, which is a lot. But things like that, like what else can you offer? What other value can you give and be a good partner? And I've been very fortunate to work with people who want to be creative and think of these, bigger deals and outside the box, and what other value can we provide each other. And like I said, very fortunate to have had two of the podcasts that I've worked on featured in Times Square on the Amazon Music billboard. And we just have to get, bigger. So what now? I think, maybe a plane banner, going over the Jersey Shore beaches.
Yeah, yes. Or the writing in the sky with a plane.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that.
We thought about that when launching solar. We joked about, like, we had when I do marketing plans, I have my blue sky list of, like, if I had an infinite amount of money, an infinite amount of time and hands, what would I want to do? And we were just, brainstorming one day with solar, and we're like, what if we fly one of those little planes with the solar, cover art and a QR code in Cupertino around the Apple Podcast building?
It probably would work.
Right? Would work. You'd be like, what is that? And like a QR code on there, and just, out your office window.
Yeah. Yes. Right after we were talking to Erica about the countries and really like knowing your niche, I'm so interested in working on a show of the scale of impact theory. How do you approach like the capturing new audiences while kind of staying in your lane and knowing your niche?
Oh, I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, because I mean, you mentioned like going after the Gen Z audience who is maturing and consuming this type of media for the first time, at the same time as the boomer generation who has a lot of them have yet to discover their favorite podcast, but it can be tough to go after both at the same time. So yeah, I'm curious if you have any insights.
Yes, absolutely. So you have to cater, if you want to go after both at the same time. You can either do one first and then the other. Then you have to think about the content you're creating and how you're targeting it. So, for example, when one of our brands comes in and wants to work with, either Lisa or Tom, and we look at the brand and we look at how it's going to be relevant to the episodes and to our audience. So, for example, one of our newest brand sponsors is, I think it's pronounced Goodyear, but it's Goodr, and they're sunglasses, and Lisa's obsessed with them. And we've had a lot of fun doing ad reads, but we talk about doing different types of ad reads, so it's not just one. So if these ads are going to be playing on a health episode on Lisa's channel, then the ad read that we do is a little bit more about protecting your eyes and the UV protection, and why that's important. Also look good, but like take care of yourself. Versus if it's going to be on a like relationships or mindset episode, that ad read is going to be a little bit more about like fashion and how, putting on a great fitting pair of sunglasses just makes you feel good. So I think that's how you go after it a little bit. And so same thing with the audiences. So if you're going to, do a campaign or run something in front of Gen Z audiences, you highlight different things versus the boomers. And I think that's how we're going to have to do it. It's going to be a little bit more tedious, but it's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, the last topic I had for you, Stephanie, is how you approach SEO, especially with the guest lineup you have that literally, Impact Theory has some of the A-listers, Matthew McConaughey, Tony Robbins, Simon Sinek, Danica Patrick was on recently. David Goggins, the list goes on and on. But a lot of times those guests are curated next to deep subject matter experts in the field who know a lot about a very specific area of self-help and self-improvement. So first, my assumption would be the Jay Shetty episode does there's a huge variance in when these large guests come through. Is that necessarily always the case?
Yes, for YouTube, generally. This is all just generalizations from our data. Yes, for YouTube, it greatly impacts because it's a search term, and YouTube is a search engine. Podcasts, it's a little bit different because the relationship with the host is different, right? Like podcasting is so intimate because you're usually listening alone, right? It's not something you'd like a TV show where you put on with your family and sit down on a couch and you all enjoy it together. It's usually, like in your ears, you're doing something else. And you develop these parasocial relationships with the host where you want to hear the guest, but you're coming back for the host because they're going to interview someone different every time. So you may be more drawn to like, oh, this episode came out with this host and I really like the guest. But it's not like when you go into YouTube, you're like, I'm obsessed with this actor and I want to see all of the interviews that they've done. We don't really see the same trend in podcasts where you search for the same actor and like listen to all of their podcast interviews, right? You listen because of how the host asks questions. So YouTube, absolutely yes. It doesn't hurt on podcasts. I mean, having those bigger names definitely draws more listeners in, but it works differently because our algorithms aren't built the same, you know?
Yes, yeah. And have you found the like sort of best practices for SEO? How applicable are they from YouTube to the podcast apps?
Oh, YouTube. I mean, of course, like it is deeply ingrained into how we build out our campaigns and our strategies for YouTube and SEO and keywords and our titles. And we're very particular about that. And podcasting is a little bit different. You know, there's a whole other side of YouTube of really like crafting the titles and being specific and the word placement and the numbers and this is all caps and this isn't. And podcasts, it's totally different. Like we want to know like who you're talking to and what are the top 2 things you're talking about. You know, like give me 5 seconds of if I'm going to listen to this episode because I'm listening for the host versus YouTube. It's like suggested for you. And it could be people from all over the place, which is great. But that's how YouTube works versus SEO on podcasts. I don't think anyone's figured it out yet. I think we're all still working the plan and testing things out, like putting your transcripts, you know, not in a PDF, but actually on every single episode page on your website. Does that help? Is there improvement? You know, we're all told these things, but there hasn't been long enough data yet to see which of these really work.
Yes. And one vendor of Glassbox that I will definitely give a shout out on the podcast SEO front is Voxelize. And I believe they have a podcast and I believe you appeared on their podcast a few months ago.
Yes. Podcast, yes.
Yeah. And they have really strong data and just a solid like SEO studio tool for podcasting. So shout out Voxelize that has been helpful for Glassbox creators.
Shout out Voxelize.
Yeah. Yes. So Stephanie, last heavy hitting question, but before we wrap, what podcasts are you jamming into on a personal front?
Right now. So just started the retrievals. I'm super interested in it. I really love this era of short form storytelling we're having on podcasts, the limited series. You know, they do 8 or 10 episodes and it's either, you know, true crime or documentary or just storytelling, even the fiction podcast. We're in this very bingeable age, you know, Hulu shows or Amazon Prime or whatever, they come out in 8 or 10 episodes. And so we're used to that. But these documentary style storytelling, I think, is going to be the next wave of what we see. You know, we saw Betrayal come out the end of last year, and then that got turned into a Hulu show this month. And then so retrievals, and then Scamanda, got my blood boiling.
So I listened to the first episode of Retrievals. It is such important work, important storytelling. It gets very new. It's a medical clinic and kind of chaos ensues and there's like mistreatment of patients. Really well done, but some of the it gets very detailed. And I was cooking dinner and kind of getting a little woozy just with everything going on. But it's so well done. It brought me too much into the story. But yes. the second one I'm not familiar with. What's like kind of the high level? Scamanda, yeah.
So it's recent. I think it came out in June. And I won't give too much away, but this woman named Amanda says she has cancer, you know, spends years in treatments, years fundraising. And there's a lot of things that go wrong. And that's what we'll leave it at, because I don't want to tell you anymore. I mean, you Fair. Get it in the first episode. And I also wanted to add, since it is Wednesday, that the other podcast that is also on my rotation is in the Glassbox family, My Worst Date. They drop new episodes on Wednesdays, so I'm super excited to listen to that on my drive home.
Yes, shout out My Worst Date. And Christina, who is a co-host of My Worst Date, is on the team at Impact Theory. So there's a lot of crossover between Glassbox and Impact Theory. Amazing
And
stuff.
that's like the microcosm of the industry. You know, we work together, but we all have outside hobbies, but we support each other. And, you know, even if you just take one listen, which I did, and then I fell in love with it. And now I'm fangirl.
Yes, yes. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for the Rex. Thank you so much for the valuable insight. We love having you on. Where can listeners connect with you after the episode?
Find me on Instagram, Twitter, Threads at Steph Arakelian, or on LinkedIn, Stephanie Arakelian. And Nick, this was such a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to connect. I have to do a little personal note at the end, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Proud of you I am, and this big launch that you just had, and how much you've grown, and really taking Glassbox in the upward trajectory. And I'm so excited and proud of you, and so I was very happy to be here to talk with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words and all the time this morning. And for the audience, thank you for listening to this episode of The Business of Sound. The show is produced by myself, Nick Kastner, and our wonderful producer, Erica Miranda, who had a little cameo in today. So yeah, thank you, Erica. We release new episodes every other Thursday. We would love a 5-star review. It helps support the show. It's actually one thing that podcasts are ranked on. So the 5-star review is very helpful. Follow Glassbox Media on Instagram and LinkedIn. Again, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in future episodes.